Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm kind of new on here, so this is my first actual video. If you know me, you already know that maybe I'm a psychotherapist. I'm also a sewist and a knitter, as you can see. Last year I started designing and selling some knitting patterns. You can find me on Instagram. I'm planning to make some sewing tutorials, so before I start doing that, I thought, let me make a small video about what do you actually need to start sewing. So maybe you're someone who always wanted to learn how to sew and you're not sure where to start. And today I just want to talk with you about what are the essential things you need if you want to start sewing. Personally, I started with very few things. That's probably not very typical. I just had a sewing machine at home. I learned how to sew in school. Then I came home, saw that the machine was really similar to the one I was using in school. I just started taking old clothes, taking them apart, using those fabrics to create new things, kind of experimenting. That's how I learned. Then I think my mom got me like some fabric scissors, which are actually really essential. I had obviously the machine, the sewing thread, and then I had, in the very beginning, I think I had maybe only 2 pins. Which I don't recommend. So yeah, let's get into it. I'm going to try to start to tell you first the things that I think are really mandatory, and then some things that might be a bit more optional. So here next to me, I have the first super essential thing, which is a sewing machine. You don't necessarily need to buy a new one in the beginning. My mom gifted me this one. After I had been sewing for a bit, like I said, we had a very old one at home. I love it. I've had it for over 10 years. It's a quite basic one. I don't remember exactly how much it costs. It's from the brand Brother, and it's called Innovis 10. I don't know if it still exists, the same model. But you can for sure look for secondhand machines, for example, on eBay, sometimes in some thrift stores, depending on where you live. There are, here in Germany, I know that there are some websites where you can actually rent a machine, which is really cool. So you can rent it, and once, if you decide that you actually want to keep it, what you have already paid in rent will come off the purchasing price. So you can decide to keep it and buy it. For the stitches and the functions of the machines, this one has like 16 different stitches. To be honest, most of them I have never used. What I use, of course, is like a straight stitch. That's what you use for almost sewing everything. And then zigzag stitch is really essential, especially if you don't have an overlock machine. I will talk about that after. And a buttonhole stitch is quite important if you ever want to make something with buttons. That's it, to be honest. You don't need much more. Yeah, and then usually, at least my machine, they come with some supplies. This one is for sure very essential. It's called a seam ripper, and this is what it looks like. Basically, every time you make a mistake, sew something together that you were not supposed to, and so on, you use this to rip your seams. But like I said, this one came with my machine, so you should check what comes with your machine. Maybe you don't need to buy it extra. Other things that came with my machines are some different, like basically machines have a foot attachment. Basically, you can remove it. This is the one I use for everything. It's a quite basic one. This also works for zigzag stitch. And then mine has one that looks like this. This one is used for making buttonholes. Then there is this one, I would say, is quite important. You need this for when you want to attach zippers. And then what else? I would say the other one that is quite useful but not mandatory is one that, let me find it, looks like this. And this is can be used for attaching buttons with the machine, but this is something that you could also do by hand. yeah, so that's it for the sewing machine. The next really important thing is some sewing thread. I have a few different ones here. I think in the beginning you could just buy a black and a white one, because for sure you will at some point need white or black sewing thread. And what I can recommend is to buy the longest length that you can find, especially ones that you might use for multiple projects. And these two are 1,000 meters. I got them from a shop which is now called Self-Made. It's a German shop. They also have an online shop. So this is from their own brand, I think. Usually it's universal sewing thread what I get, and usually I think it's polyester. I think it's the most resistant one. This is another one from a local shop. I sometimes get the thread from the brand called Gütermann, which I think is a quite good brand, so you can also look for this one in shops or online. For sure, any sewing supply shop will have sewing thread. Usually what I can also strongly recommend is whenever you buy a fabric, just get a matching sewing thread to go with it. Some websites show you the matching thread sometimes if you happen to order online. If you go to a shop, the best thing would be to choose the thread there so that it matches your fabric. I mean, fabric, of course, is something that you need when you start sewing. For practicing, you can take anything in the beginning. If you have any old fabrics, old t-shirts, old clothes, bed sheets, anything that you don't need anymore, for sure you could just practice with that. And then if you need a fabric, again, you can buy it in sewing supply shops, fabric shops, online shops. You can find probably everything there. Then the next important thing is scissors. I have two pairs here. This one is for fabric. These are fabric scissors. Super important, because with this one you can really cut fabric very easily. And this one is only used for fabric. Don't use it for anything else. It's just, yeah, that's the way it is. And this is a small pair of scissors. You can use any type, but this is like a snip scissor like this. It's very useful for just cutting off threads, and with this you can get really close to the fabric so that your ends are not visible once you cut them off. Then you of course need sewing pins. I don't have the box anymore. This is where I hold all of my pins. Just any sewing pins will do. Again, like in a shop online, just you search sewing pins. They're quite cheap. You will usually be able to get a quite big pack for not so much money. That's it. You just need it when you start sewing, and you need to hold your fabric together before you can actually sew over it. So very essential. Then I think a ruler is quite important. This is used whenever you want to cut out fabric. You need to mark a square or mark or measure anything before you cut it. I have a few different ones, but if I had to choose one, maybe I would recommend something like this, because like this you can more easily draw 90 degrees angles so that your squares are or rectangles are straight. Overall, it can also be quite useful to have a very big ruler, but maybe you don't need that in the very beginning. So a ruler, I would say you need. Then, last but not least, it's really important to have something to use for marking your fabric before you cut it, so you can draw a line and know where you need to cut. I have two things here. One, it's called the Tailor chalk. I've had this for super long. I think this is just a really classic thing used to mark fabric. Obviously, like then it just goes away with like water or with time. This is white usually, so it's very good for dark fabrics, but it doesn't work on white fabrics because you will not be able to see this. So the other thing that I actually bought quite recently are these heat erasable pens, and they're amazing. I really like them. I have a white and a purple one, so like that on white fabric I can use the purple one and the white for dark fabric, and basically it just goes away once you iron the fabric. Very important before you use any of these things. Usually it's good to just make a small test to see if it leaves any marks on the fabric or not. Yeah, so I would say those are the essentials that you really need if you want to start sewing. Then I think this can be really useful. I mean, some things you might already have at home. I think if you ever need to take your body measurements, maybe this is more optional, but I would say that a measuring tape can be very, very useful and might be essential depending on the project you choose. Last but not least, this is an optional thing, but I just want to show you. This is my overlock machine. I really love it. This is used to finish off raw edges. It's a bit annoying to thread, and it only finishes raw edges, and that's why in the beginning you don't need it, because there are other ways you can finish raw edges. You can do a zigzag stitch on this machine. You can use other types of seams that hide the raw edges. But this was a game changer once I got it. So I didn't have this since the very beginning, but definitely I think if you start sewing and do it for a bit longer, you might want to get one. But yeah, not the most beginner friendly. Like, you will learn how to use it with time and maybe learn to love it. But I definitely have a bit of a love-hate relationship with my overlock machine. As you can see, it has 4 threads that you need to thread. So that's quite annoying to do. Yeah, this one is from Yuki, and it's called MO4S. Again, it was gifted to me. I'm super happy with it. There are for sure like 1,000 models out there. There are secondhand machines. Again, this is something you could also like rent and try out. Let me just show you what the machine does. Basically, it just finishes your edges like super clean. And while it finishes, like while it sews your edges, it also cuts the fabric that is on the edge. So it does those 2 things at the same time. It's super cool. And you can do a lot of things with an overlock machine. You can also make swimsuits, which is, I find, really cool. So it's really good for sewing stretchy fabrics. Again, you can do it on the normal machine, but if you're thinking of, okay, one day you really want to make a lot of swimwear or t-shirts and things like that, very, very useful and practical to have an overlock machine. Yeah, so I think that covers most of it, or I think that should cover everything you need if you want to start sewing. And the final thing I recommend is maybe you can just choose a project before you buy the things you need. So you can also buy more specifically for your project. Once you have a project in mind, it might be easier to figure out what you need. But of course, there are some things that you will need for any project. There are so-called sewing patterns. This is where you buy, nowadays it's often sold as a PDF file, but it might sometimes be also sold as a paper pattern, where you just literally have the pieces that you will need to cut out of your fabric are made out of paper. You lay them on your fabric, and so you know exactly what pieces you need to cut. In the beginning, I don't think you need a sewing pattern necessarily for your first project. Personally, this is how I learn, but everyone learns differently. I would recommend going with just finding a video tutorial, maybe of a beauty case or a smaller project, but you should choose any project you want. You should choose a project that you're really motivated to make and a project that you, really love. And then you can just search for a video and maybe make your first project following a video tutorial. That's, in my opinion, the easiest way. But again, of course, you could also buy a pattern, and then some sewing patterns will have a video tutorial to go with the pattern. That's also really cool. yeah, but if you don't want to spend money in the beginning, I think it's not a necessity to get a pattern for your first ever sewing project. Okay, I think that should cover everything. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to comment below. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see my first tutorial and my next content, which will be coming up very soon. Thank you. Bye bye.